I'm Larry Moss, and I'd like to welcome you to Brush with Knowledge. Throughout this series, we're going to explore the role of teaching artistry as a tool to transform education and ignite your imagination. In each episode, we'll highlight the work of a different teaching artist and offer ideas that you can use in your own classrooms, meetings, and even the larger communities you serve and live in. Today, I'm talking with Darren Stevenson, co-founder of Push Physical Theater, a theater company that has truly pushed the boundaries of physical movement. Welcome, Darren.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Now, anyone listening to that intro that's never seen you is probably wondering what that even means.
The boundaries of physical movement.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I've got to say, I was looking, I was trying to figure out how I would describe you and was looking at your website and I found the words intense athleticism, gravity-defying acrobatics, and soulful artistry.
Yeah.
Great marketing words. But,
fantastic.
But,
yeah. I have no idea what it means.
How would you really describe Push to somebody that doesn't know your work?
Yeah, it's actually surprisingly difficult to describe. And I think primarily because we are using a medium that cannot be described in words. That's why we're doing movement. I would be in a lot less pain and have to go to the gym less frequently if I could just stand up and talk. And so what I'm always looking for are concepts and feelings and stories that I can feel up here and in my head and my heart, but I don't know how to express in language. And that's what physical theater ends up being. Now, to watch, it's really a hybrid art form. So we're using everything from contemporary dance, modern dance. There's a little ballet in there. There's circus acrobatics at various different levels depending on the performer. There's acting. There's kind of a European clown hybrid. There's something called non-traditional partnering, corporeal and illusionary mime. And all of these art forms, we sort of throw them into the pot and stir them around and pull out the thing that expresses what we want to say the most.
That actually was a really good explanation after saying it was going to be hard to do.
I should be an actor.
I guess you've had to answer the question more often than I have.
Yeah.
So you mentioned dance, you mentioned mime, you mentioned like all of this whole combination of things. What got you started in this direction?
I was, as a teenager, I was cripplingly shy. I went through a couple of situations where my family moved from one town to another. And at about age 12, 13, that kind of range, I had somehow turned into myself. I don't remember it ever being anything traumatic. I just became shy and did not know what to say or how to communicate with people and just couldn't figure it out and was sort of crippled by this.
Well, so did you have formal training in dance or circus or any of those things that...
Not at that point. So I wanted to be either a visual artist like my mom or I wanted to be a preacher like my dad. And I thought preaching is probably out because I don't want to stand up in front of people. And then although
you've learned how to really talk in front of people.
yeah, I got that, figured it out. And the key for me was being in a play. So at about 13, my church had this little drama group thing, and we were making essentially commercials for Jesus. And I volunteered and then to be in this thing, and immediately regretted it and was terrified and nervous but ended up performing in this show. And the moment, I can remember it as if it was 10 minutes ago, the switch from being so terrified of what was going to happen, and then the moment of breaking the wings and walking out onto the stage and realizing that the shyness went away. Because it was coming from, I didn't know what to say to people. And here, they write it down for you in theater. I don't know if you're aware of this. All I had to do is memorize it, and it was amazing. And the wall of laughter that came from the audience and the applause, I was sold. And so after that, of course, went on to study more and go to college and do this professionally.
So I've said that too. That the moment you get that recognition from the audience that they're paying attention to you, they're interested in what you have to do and say, helps so much. And, I can remember earlier in my career, very similar, like for years and years, walking out on stage and being scared out of my mind.
Right.
And I had been doing it professionally for years, but the moment the audience laughs, it kind of releases all of that tension, makes things better. So I used to do that on purpose. I used to play with that. I would come out in character kind of nervous and shy and like I'm shaking and whatever, and create that laughter. And then I felt okay to go into the rest of the show. So I guess I'm hearing some of that same thing. So that's kind of cool.
And it's still the performing bit of it is my favorite part of the job, which is not the case. There are a lot of, I'm still kind of introverted in my normal life. I just save it all up for the stage. But we have performers that have come and joined the company, and they'll stay a year and they'll realize, I just don't like performing. They love being in the studio. They love training. They love to create. Some of them love to teach, and just performing does nothing for them. And they are like aliens to me, because all I want to do, if I could get away with not training, not rehearsing, and just be on stage, it's not about wanting to be, well, it used to be. When I was younger, it was about being seen as something that I'm not, something I was aspiring to. And now I just turned 51 and I'm old and different. And what I really love is the conversation of performance, the fact that it's not just going one way, that you are recognizing communication coming back to you from the audience, and you're playing along with them, and you're learning as well as teaching, and it's great.
And push is so much more than the physical movement. And you already said, you used a couple of words earlier, you referred to storytelling. And I think, to me, when I watch you, that's the important part. Although I guess the storytelling and what you just said, the story listening and hearing of the audience's reaction and that two-way conversation. But talk more about the storytelling, because especially in your more recent work, that's, Dracula and what's the one you've been touring?
Yeah, we've been touring Generic Male.
Generic Male.
Just what we need, another show about men.
Yes. and that's way, that's entirely about the story and the tale and the journey.
Yeah.
So what kind of pulled you in that direction, since you said that it was the performance piece and being in front of the crowd that got you first?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. One is that I feel like the stories, the really deep stories, for maybe this is not true for everybody, are in our bodies as much as they're in our heads. And for people listening, if you've ever had the experience of hurting yourself and that bringing back a memory from you when you were a kid, or if somebody touches you in a certain way and that triggers a memory, all of that stuff seems like it's locked up inside of our bodies. And so there are stories there as well. And so some of our work, when I say stories, I'm not necessarily talking about narratives, but they can come out of play. We get into the studio and just there's a lot of goofing around and trying things. And can we do this move? Or let's not talk for 15 minutes and we'll just move and we'll improvise. And 90% of that stuff is junk and it doesn't work. But every now and then you hit a nugget of, oh, this bit's really interesting. Let's expand on that. We've started to use in the last few years more and more text. it's still our writing process comes out of movement first, usually. So it'll start with some sort of game. In fact, in Generic Mail, there's a piece that we perform about the concept of consent. And it started with movement. It started with an arbitrary rule, which was Darren and Ashley are going to work for 30, 45 minutes. And the deal is Ashley never touches the floor. So he is always off the ground, which means I'm lifting him. And how many movements can we come up with that? And again, most of it was terrible, but there was about 6 minutes there that were really good. And so then it was, okay, the next question is, why am I lifting you? Why are you in the air? And he's younger than me. And I have actually, my sons are around about Ashley's age. So there was this conversation about fathers and sons. And so we start improvising. What are the conversations we've had with our dads? What conversations would we wish we had had with our dads? What conversations have I had with my sons? And all of that started to come up. And what we ended up with is Ashley beginning to improvise a conversation between a father and a son about what the son is expecting to be a conversation about sex, this is the birds and the bees talk. But actually what the dad wants to talk about is consent, which is a much deeper and more terrifying and embarrassing thing to talk about in detail. And that became the work. And then eventually it was just writing those improvisations down and memorizing the choreography. And it's a really lovely collaborative way, I think, to write, rather than starting with text, somebody in front of a computer screen trying to think of words until their forehead bleeds, and then you get into the studio and figure out how to move. We sort of flip that around.
So I'm wondering, you talking about, well, consent is a difficult and deep conversation to have. Are there topics that you have not wanted to bring up in your performance, or things that you haven't figured out how to do yet?
Well, it's funny you say that, because so we have a concept for a show that we have committed to trying to do. We're not ready to do this or to tackle this. We have a title. The title of the show is Welcome to the Gun Show.
I can see how that could be triggering.
Yeah, that movement you just did where you leaned back in your chair, that's what everybody does. I say the title. Yeah, triggering, that's the word. So, that's a topic that, so this would be another duet show with Ashley and myself. We're both British. I've lived here a lot longer than he has. But we both grew up in a country where even the police don't have guns. So guns were a Hollywood thing. For me, it was sort of a toy. It was a plaything. And then I'm looking now, living in the US, at an epidemic of gun violence and school shootings, and what is our response to that? And the problem, of course, is any conversation you have about guns is highly charged emotionally. And so what we're looking at is a lot of people talking past each other. Everybody's got an opinion and nobody knows anything. That's what it feels like. And so the reason why we are not doing the show yet is because we fall in that camp of people who don't know anything. So in 2 years' time, hopefully we will. And the process terrifies me. In fact, in our grant application, we just applied for NEA funding for this project. And in our grant application, we said, this topic terrifies us. I have my youngest son is, or until recently was in the army in special operations. So sort of the tip of the spear guy who guns are the tools for his life. He has been to war several times. We'll be interviewing him and talking to him and other friends about violence and their perspectives, and we're really trying to get every side of this. Yeah. So there you go.
So now that we've touched on something really light,
God, can we start over?
No, I think that's important, because this is just listening to you talk about that, the learning that you need to do to feel comfortable doing this, the education you want to do with others. I mean, it all ties in with this whole teaching artistry and using the art to teach. And since this is a new podcast for those that are just becoming familiar with the term teaching artist, this isn't, maybe I should have said this before in the opening, that what a teaching artist is not just an artist that teaches what they do. It is not just putting on plays and introducing various topics. It is using art as a tool, and that's what you're talking about, is getting up on stage and doing a performance that really touches people, that opens the door, and as you're learning, you can be teaching as well. And I think that's a really powerful thing that we have here as teaching artists.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, I mean, I just gave a very vague definition of what a teaching artist is to me. It's somebody that uses the art as a tool to teach. What is it to you? And this is a question that I intend to ask everybody that I talk with here, because I think it's going to take constant redefining of the term teaching artist. I mean, in fact, I think even as we talk, if I ask you again 15 minutes from now, you might give me a different answer. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
So what does the term teaching artist mean to you?
It's my hope is that I can have the student express the things that are closest to them. I want them to tell their stories. So the putting on of a play or teaching choreography or movement, all of those things they're important things. Teaching, I'd call those technique. If you're teaching an actor how to project their voice, if you're teaching a dancer how to hold their arm, how to do a physical stunt, that's all interesting and important stuff for a performer. But all of those are techniques. They're not art. The art thing is very difficult to pin down. But I think that's the bit where you're able to tap into an experience, a feeling, something that's important to you, and you're able to translate that into a medium that you can pass on to other people. That's the art bit, or at least the performing or presenting of art. So when we're teaching, we do residencies with at-risk youth. We work with medically fragile children. Heather, the other artistic director of PUSH, the other leader, who's also my wife, she works with elderly people in senior living centers. And all of these different groups, the three that I mentioned, one of the biggest complaints they have is nobody listens to me. People don't listen to me because I'm old. People don't listen to me. The at-risk teen, the youth, we're dealing with teenagers these are the kids that they don't look like kids. They look like grown-ups, and they look scary, and they look menacing, and they are the kids that people cross the street to avoid. And they are very often in special educational institutions of last resort. This is where they get sent because everything they're doing doesn't work in the regular population. And they are all, every one of them that we're working with is the victim of some kind of trauma. They're mostly suffering from PTSD. They've all got some really tough stories. And the complaint that they all have is nobody listens to me. And if I can help them to share their stories and make them more confident in doing that, then that's it for me. And the artist part of teaching artist for me has to do with a certain kind of flexibility that happens in the classroom, whatever that is. So what I mean by that is when I walk into a room, any of us in PUSH, we will have a loose framework of, okay, this is what we're planning to do. Here are the objectives, just the way any teacher does. But what actually ends up happening in that classroom, because we're artists, what we do very well is pivot into a million different directions. So you have a student that walks in who's having a bad day and whatever you're doing isn't working for them, we can pivot to what is. If they come in with some crazy idea, generally speaking, we can accommodate that. I'll tell you a quick story. I had a student a couple of years ago that was loving the workshop. He was about 16 years old, having a great time, but he was a pretty toxic kid and he was bullying the other students. And, you know, it would be easy to reflectively say, we just need to kick him out. He's making the environment difficult. But he was loving the class and he was getting so much out of it, and we were getting through to him. And because Heather and Ashley and myself were all in that room, I said, why don't you two teach the other students? Let me work with this student on my own. So we go to another room, and he says, I don't want to do this. If I can't be with the others, I don't want to do this. And I said, yeah, man, I get that. Okay, so what do you want to do? And as I'm talking, there's this exercise we've done, which if you can picture, you and the other performer would grab each other's wrists and you put your toes together and you start to lean away. We call this weight away from center. And it's a very simple thing. If you're teaching little kids, they're learning about triangles and shapes and structures and architecture and physical science. And with older students, they're learning about trust. And we are now giving each other weight. And if we let go of each other, we could get hurt, we could fall. And so it relies on trust. So we had done this already, so he knew what I was doing. So as I'm saying, yeah, I hear you, what you're saying you want to leave, and I'm grabbing his wrist and he's grabbing mine, and we're both leaning away. So he's still complaining at this point, still saying, yeah, I don't want to leave. And I said, well, if you want to leave, why don't you leave? I mean, like, just leave. But we're holding each other. And so he kind of gives a tug towards the door. And I said, come on, you can do better than that. Leave, like try to get out of here. So now he's really pulling me with all of his might towards the door, and I'm keeping him in the room, and he's laughing and I'm laughing, and we've got this tug of war. And so now he's laughing and he's still complaining through his laughter that he doesn't want to be there. And I said, okay, like, I know, you know, like the school isn't going to let you just leave, but we're here. I said, if this were real life, if we weren't laughing, what would you want to do? And he says, it would just make me want to punch something. And so because we're artists, the answer is usually yes, not no. So I said, all right, let's do that. Do you know what stage combat is? No. I said, well, you know, when you see a fight scene in a movie, well, I can teach you how to do that. He's like, oh, that's great. I said, do you want to punch me? Am I allowed? Yeah. You can't punch your teachers ever, but in this room, we can do this. So he and I, over the course of a couple of hours, over a few days, create this choreography. And at the end of it, he was quite nervous about performing. And I was able to say back to him, I said, man, you're living the dream. Like most of the students in your school have felt how you have felt. They all want to punch something or somebody. They all want to leave and they can't. And you get to express what they can't do. You get to put movement to it and do this thing. And when I asked him, how do you want this to end? How does this choreography end? And he said, I think we should make up. Like, I think we should hug at the end and make friends. And so he put the tail on this piece. We worked it out together, and he got to perform that thing. And there's a good chance that moment right there was life-changing for him. That little jog to the left or jog to the right of the trajectory that their life is on may make him a completely different person by the time he's 25 or 30.
That's a really beautiful story. That's amazing. And it demonstrates, yes, the power of using art to get through to somebody. What about using art not just to get them to open up and express, but using the art to teach other subject matter? Like, we had a conversation, not that we were recording, about simple machines and science. And there's so much science in what you do and understanding your body from, you know, there's the biology, there's the physics, the engineering pieces of a lot of what you do. I've seen you teach things that are not that are more than just that storytelling and expression and letting out those feelings. And talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say is I do not see art as being a separate subject that is separate from other things.
I agree with you
right?
on that, yes.
It is in everything. And in fact, for many cultures, it's part of life. Singing songs, dancing, communities expressing themselves, making art is not a separate activity. It's something that is done while you're doing things. There are songs for washing clothes and moving through life, and hunting songs, and all these kinds of expressions where art is used. For me, it's not so much that it's easy to use art to teach other things. It's, in my mind, should be how we teach other things always. Because if we're not engaging each other with interest, then what are we doing it for? So yeah, you mentioned, I mean, one of the things that we love doing is teaching little kids basic physics. Yeah. Because at that age, it's all incredible. And so, so this shape, it was just describing grabbing wrists and leaning weight away from center. We can invert that and lean the weight towards center. So if you picture a triangle where the floor between your feet is the base, so your feet are as far apart as possible, and then your bodies are leaning in together, and either hands or shoulders or a hand to a head or the side or whatever is the contact point, and you're pressing that weight in towards the middle. And what you've done is created a structure. You could take students in a gym and teach them that exercise and then have them look up, and usually there's going to be some steel work that's filled with these triangles that's holding up the entire building. They can look at a cathedral and see an arch. They can look at the way a suspension bridge is built. All of these structures, this mechanical advantage that we're utilizing, when they do it the way that we teach it, the science that they're feeling it happening inside their own bodies. When you have the smallest kid in the room pick up and carry around the biggest kid because they understand their bodies as machines, it's illuminating. They will never forget those lessons.
After all of these years that you have done all of these various things with different kids in different age groups, and is teaching artistry what you thought it was going to be? Wow, this is I don't think I've ever seen you have to think that long.
Yeah, that's a great question. I am actually the answer that first came to mind is actually the answer my wife would probably give, which is yes, absolutely. Like teaching is all that she's ever wanted to do. And the more needy the student is, the happier she is in the room. And it is a passion for her. She is one of the people that she performs because she's good at it. But if you put her in a room full of students, she could be there all day long. She's at home. For me, I started teaching because I was the recipient of teaching. I did not grow up wealthy. And in fact, if there was a program, if there was a class, if there was a thing that cost money, usually I wasn't going to be able to do it. I was one of those kids. And so the reason that I'm doing this today professionally is because there were an awful lot of people, community-minded people, who either had grant funding or they just gave their time away for free to do classes that you didn't need to pay for. And because of all those volunteer hours and all of that funding support that various organizations that as an adult, I don't even know what they were. I have no idea what was behind that. But all I knew is that some grown-up was willing to teach me to do something without my parents having to pay for it. And so I was able to do it. And so for me, if I started teaching because I'm working off a debt to society, right? It's like, you've given me this incredible career. I've got to travel all over the world. I performed for thousands upon thousands of people now. Been on TV and done, a show, and I've like, it's just been amazing. And so, so giving back was really why I started. And the change, or the thing that I didn't expect, is how fulfilling that it is to me. That walking into a room and watching lives actually change right in front of you is just incredible. And it doesn't, I don't feel, I don't ever even feel like I did something amazing. It's like an amazing thing happened in the room because of this technique that I've learned how to do. But it doesn't feel like it's me. It feels like I just get to be in there and witness it happening. And that I'm just incredibly grateful. And I think it's something everybody should do. Find, especially if you're an old person, if you're an old, mature person, if you've got gray hair or no hair, grab a younger person, hold tight onto them and teach them something.
That is the perfect lead into what I want to do next.
Nice.
I had asked you to come prepared to actually teach something. And I want to explain for those listening, the goal here is two-part. One, for there to be a reason, aside from fascinating conversation and listening to everything that Darren has to say and offer on teaching artistry, I want everybody to actually get something that they learn from this that they can do.
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping is that everybody else can experience what you've been describing, that feeling of walking into that room, walking into, whatever community center, whatever environment that each person has. It could be a corporate boardroom. Yeah. I don't care. There are teachable moments. There are things to be taught. So I would love to see what you have to teach that everybody can learn from that's listening, and that they can then take and walk into another room and try themselves.
Sure.
So as you're listening to this, or watching, if you're watching the video version of the podcast, think about places where you can make use of this.
Yeah.
What do you...
This will be, this is going to be somewhat challenging because we're using an audio medium for most listeners, but I think you can drop a link somewhere in this thing.
We will absolutely. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Yeah, there you go. So we've got a couple of free training videos that we actually put up. In fact, Larry, thank you. We filmed them in your studio. I think it was the day after lockdown became close to being a thing, and and about 4 days before your studio got closed down, we realized we needed to make some training for our students, and so we came in and shot these videos, and they still exist.
Yes, COVID, the whole COVID thing was a thing. It changed the way we worked and made us think differently. In fact, that's what got me thinking towards a podcast and all of that, and doing more of this remote learning. So there's two things. One of them I'll skip over quite quickly because I described them already. So this idea of a weight away or weight towards. Two things here. I want to, for people that are teachers, it is very difficult to teach certain kinds of things. Singing is one of them. Acting, not so much, but singing for sure. Acting a little bit for some people. Dancing for most people. These are terrifying things. I think there's a level of vulnerability of just being up there and exposing your voice or your body to criticism that is terrifying. And in fact, the worst thing you can do is have a student, especially teenagers, have them in a room and say, hey,
Just improvise some dance moves for me. Like, do anything you want.
You would terrify me if you said that.
Yeah, right. And I am not a singer. If you asked me to just sing something, just scat for a little while, I would start crying rather than do that. No, I don't want to. And if you then were to tell the student, well, you can do anything, what they'll usually say is, I don't know what to do. And so the response comes back again. Well, you can do anything. Like, just do any move. It doesn't matter. Just do a move. Just dance. Just move. No, I don't. Now, they're saying I don't know what to do. What they really mean is I don't know what not to do. Right? What they're doing is their brain is processing a million different movements. And each one of those, they're going, no, I'll look stupid if I do that. That'll be stupid. I've got to think of a better thing. No, I can't do that. And they're so wrapped up in their own embarrassment, their own fear of looking dumb. So what we try to do is remove that process, short circuit that process. So rather than telling them to do anything, we tell them you can't do anything except for the following things. And you will have a very small window of movements that you allow. And you're almost gamifying the process. Here is a very simple, completely arbitrary rule set, and you follow the rules, right? So for instance, we could do this with weight towards the center. You stand apart from your partner, you put your hands together and you give them weight. You both lean in to the point at which, if they were to suddenly let go, you would fall forwards. And you both want to be in that situation. And that's all I want you to do. You're not allowed to do anything but that. Okay, now that you've done that, great. Can you put more pressure in one hand than the other? And as you put more pressure into one side, you realize that you don't need the other hand, and it sort of just floats away. Now you're doing it one-handed. Can you bring that other hand to the person's shoulder? So now you've got one partner shoulder and one partner hand. We're still bringing weight into the middle. And then you start to ask them, okay, pick another body part. Can you lean in with a shoulder-to-shoulder connection? Could you do a hand-to-hip connection, whatever it is? And so then you're very slowly increasing the vocabulary as you go. There's another super easy exercise. The other thing I do with students that are, we'll call them resistant students, right, is not say they're going to dance. We don't use the word dance initially. That's exactly what they're doing. We don't say acting, we don't say movement, we don't say clown, or say mime. We just say, okay, you're both going to sit on chairs facing each other. Just having students sit on chairs will reduce their fear by quite a lot because they're not standing up. They're in a more safe place. Okay, so you're both in chairs, you're facing your partner. All you have to do is change position. So we don't even say move, just change position. And very often I've watched students who don't know what to do. And so they fold their arms and drop their head. And they'll say, I'm thinking of what to do. And I usually will stop them there and go, no, that's the move. You folded your arms, you drop your head. That's move number one. Now the other partner, now you change position. So they change position. And then the first person change. And we're not asking them to perform, not asking them to do anything athletic, not asking them to even be creative. Just change position from where you're sitting to another position. And all you do is eight positions each, and you're done. We haven't really done something that could be described as performable. But as they show each other what they did, you move, then I move, then you move, then I move. That's kind of interesting. So then you'll say, okay, well, what if you, instead of stopping at each position, if you flow through a couple of them? What happens if you bring the chairs closer together? What happens if you change the gaze? If one person is always looking up in the corner of the room and this person is always looking at them no matter what they do? And then you ask the students that are watching, well, what did you see? Oh, I thought it felt like that guy was ignoring that guy. That guy wanted to be friends, but he hated him. And so now
back to the storytelling.
So now the story was locked up inside their muscles, and it just came out without the performers even knowing what it was. And as they do that, as they get accolades then from their peers, they'll start to add a little bit more. They'll start to take a little more risk. The biggest thing for any of this, and this is for anybody listening, if you watch our little training series and try to do things, we want you to fail. We want ourselves to fail. We have this concept that we call the 90% failure rule. So when we're doing this work, when we're improvising, I want 90% of all the moves that I try to not work, because that is evidence that I'm doing something new. Like, I've been doing this for 35, 36 years now. So I've got a big bag of tricks. There are things that I can do physically that I know will impress you. And it's easy for me to reach into that bag of tricks, that bag of toys, and just start presenting things that I'm good at. But that's not creative. That's just me relying on my capabilities. When I'm truly being creative, it means I'm doing something new. When I'm doing something new, it's going to be terrible the first time. So that failure, that 90% failure, is evidence that I'm trying. And the beautiful thing about it is that think of spending an hour improvising. You spend an hour improvising and you fail for 90% of that hour. Well, you've got 6 minutes of usable choreography. That could be a whole piece. And all you have to do now is put it together and start to talk about the story, and you're there. It's golden.
That's great. So failure, my head jumped back to the very beginning of that when you were talking about leaning in, leaning away. We obviously don't want anybody to fail too dramatically. You don't want anybody trying this at home with their little kid. And
as long as do it with your kid. If there's cushions, pillows, or a person behind them.
So do you make sure that the people you pair up are reasonably balanced in weight, height?
No, we don't. In fact, that's not necessary at all. In fact, that's one of the beauty about this work, is that as with these very simple exercises of sharing weight, in the same way that, if I have a fulcrum, a seesaw, right, where I move that fulcrum will depend on how heavy the people. So if I want to balance that fulcrum, if I've got a baby sitting on one side and a full-grown adult male on the other side, and I want them to balance, that fulcrum needs to move towards the male, the full-grown adult male. And then now you've got a seesaw that will balance, right? So we do the same thing when you're learning to partner. If I'm partnering with somebody smaller, somebody bigger, then I'm going to lean slightly more, slightly less, depending. So yeah, that can all be. And there's nothing more fun in our performances than watching Heather lift me in the air in front of the audience. They do not expect that to happen. That's great.
So I want to change directions one more time.
Yeah.
The business side of teaching artistry.
Right.
You have been at this for, you said, at least 35, 36 years, whatever number you gave, around the same area. I think a lot of people, when they think of the business of art and the business of teaching artistry, you think of the starving artist, you think of the person that doesn't run a business there, but a lot of teaching artistry is that business piece and getting in front of those classes that you want to work with. And you're an interesting model, because so many of the teaching artists that I know and work with are individuals that are just looking to get that audience. I mean, you had said yourself before, you love the idea of just walking on stage and performing.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is challenging, but you took it not just that you have over the years had a large number of people working with you, I don't know how many people Push is right now. I mean, you mentioned you, Heather, and Ashley.
Yeah, that's sort of the core group, and then we expand depending on, we're doing in April, we have a show that we're doing with Jeff Tyzik and the Rochester Philharmonic in April. And so we'll expand, we'll pull in, other performers that have worked with us in the past to pull off that show. And for certain tours, we may have 5 to 7 performers, depending on the project. Yeah.
You've also gone in the direction, though, of your Push is a nonprofit and a theater company that operates like a lot of larger theater companies. That is a perfectly legitimate business model for a teaching artist or teaching artist company, as it is with any other business, that it's an exploration. You can do that exploration and figure out where to take your own teaching artistry and where to build your business. What drove you in that direction, as opposed to just being a couple of people doing amazing work?
Well, there's a conversation that I have often with emerging artists or new artists or college students that are in that first zone, or I'll call them amateur versus professional, and I don't mean that to be demeaning or derogatory. I simply mean I'll define professional as you make your living doing it, and amateur as you don't, which means that you're doing it for passion and joy. I have amateur performers express to me how they wish they could be professional so they could do this as their job, and this would be the thing that supports them financially, and so they can put their whole focus into it. The downside of being a professional is that your audience members turn into your customers, and your shows turn into products that you're selling. And the thing with art is that its primary purpose is really to prod at the status quo. Artists ask questions that nobody else can. Doctors, lawyers, politicians, religious leaders, all of these people are required to have answers. What artists do is formulate the question in a way that makes people think. And some of those questions, so I'll give generic mail. And that show that's a hard sell. You're asking to do a show about the worst parts of masculinity, the difficult bits of men, all the stuff that we don't want to talk about is in that show. And if I have to make my living off of selling tickets to audience members, that's going to be difficult for me to do, honestly, because instead of challenging people, I'm going to try to entertain them so that they will keep coming back for more. But art has to challenge, right? And so the reason that we went the nonprofit route is because it enables us to have funding from New York State Council on the Arts, from the Farish Foundation, from all of these other funding bodies, from the National Endowment for the Arts, all of these funding sources that say, what you're saying here is important enough that we'll put our funding behind it. Lots of private donors and individuals that donate to Push, that enable us to say the things that we need to say, even if they might be unpopular sometimes. And so I think that's the model. However, in saying all of that, artists will often undervalue themselves because what we do is fun. Like, I have a job that I, most of the time, love doing. And so because of that, there's this feeling that I should just do it for free. I should just do it for fun. I should do it for just passion. But look, those hours are hours that I can't spend building some other career. They're hours that I can't, work at a, coffee shop or be a bank manager or whatever. I'm putting into this. And my family deserves to live, we need to be paid at a level that's competitive with other industries so that we can do this and have a strong and vibrant arts culture. And so I think, for artists, I would say don't undervalue yourself.
I think that is a great statement to end on. I really appreciate that. Now, for those that are new to teaching artistry and what we do and, just interested in more of this and more of the artists that I happen to work with, although there are many everywhere you look all over the place. We'll include some links again in the show notes, links to Darren's work, and we'll all of Push, Darren, Heather, Ashley. But, I wanted to mention quickly, Teaching Artists Rock is another organization, also nonprofit, that we started up. I'll tell them too. I had actually gone out with Darren and Heather one day and asked them to talk me out of it.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen.
We tried.
Yes, they actually tried to tell me all of the reasons not to do it. But, when you're passionate about what you're doing, you sometimes just keep pushing forward. And that's what all of us are doing and what I hope to be doing with future episodes of Brush with Knowledge. And like I said, Teaching Artists Rock is an organization that has about 50 teaching artists right now on the roster, going into schools and libraries and all sorts of community places. And, there are other organizations out there too that you can use to learn more about teaching artistry, Teaching Artists of the Mid-Atlantic, the Teaching Artists Guild. We could probably list them for a while, but again, show notes. So Darren, thank you very much for doing this with me, and look forward to seeing what you do next.
Yeah, this was great to chat. Thanks, Larry.
To learn more about everyone on our program, follow the links in the show notes and at brushwithknowledge.com. This podcast has been launched with funding from Genesee Valley Council on the Arts and the New York State Council on the Arts. Recording has been done at Rockvox Recording and Production. To learn how you can help support the creation of future episodes, please follow links in the show notes or visit brushwithknowledge.com.